The glass hit the wall just inches from my head. I felt a sharp sting on my cheek and a drop of warm blood trickled down my neck, staining the collar of my favorite beige blouse. "Stop embarrassing this family with your pathetic junk," my daughter Sarah hissed across the dinner table. The dining room went dead silent. David. Her husband stared at his plate, pretending he didn't see his wife just throw a crystal water glass at her mother. My grandson Leo, sitting right beside me, flinched. He was 16 today. I looked down at the table. Next to Sarah's untouched slice of expensive bakery cake sat the gift I had brought for Leo. It was a vintage 1970s Canon film camera. I had spent 2 months tracking it down and had it fully restored. Leo loved photography, the real kind. Sarah had opened the box, sneered and laughed. "A used camera. You're living in our house, rent-free, and you buy my son garbage from a thrift store." That was a lie. I wasn't living there rent-free. I paid the $4,500 monthly lease on this luxury suburban home. I paid the utility bills. I bought the groceries. I had moved in 3 years ago to help them out when David lost his job. And somehow I had become the live-in maid and the silent ATM. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the blood from my cheek. I stood up slowly, picking up the camera from the table. I placed it gently into Leo's hands. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and apologetic. Happy birthday, Leo," I whispered. "Mom, sit down," Sarah snapped. "We haven't even cut the cake." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't argue and I didn't scream. I just decided right then that her comfortable life was over. I walked into my bedroom on the first floor and locked the door. Behind me, I could hear Sarah complaining to David about how I always ruined the mood and made everything about myself. I ignored the noise. I walked into the bathroom, cleaned the small cut on my cheek, and put a bandage on it. I looked at myself in the mirror. My name is Megan Larson. I am 68 years old. I survived a tough marriage, raised a child on my own, and built a solid retirement. I was not a victim. I had just been too generous for too long. I walked over to my closet and pulled out my large canvas duffel bag. I didn't have many personal items in this house anyway. Just clothes, a few books, and my jewelry. I packed them efficiently, rolling my sweaters and placing my shoes at the bottom. Once the bag was zipped, I sat at my small desk and opened my laptop. For 3 years, I had believed that if I just helped Sarah enough, she would eventually appreciate it. I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping a family together. I was wrong. I logged into my primary bank account. The dashboard loaded, showing the joint credit card I shared with Sarah, the one she used for her daily Pilates classes, organic groceries, and designer clothes. I clicked on the account settings. With 2 simple clicks, I removed her as an authorized user. Next, I went to the auto pay settings. I canceled the payments for their 2 car insurances, the family cell phone plan, and the high-speed internet. I watched the screen refresh as every single financial lifeline I provided was severed. By midnight, my preparations were complete. Tomorrow morning, she was going to wake up to a very different reality. I woke up at 5 in the morning. The house was completely dark and quiet. I dressed in a comfortable sweater and slacks, grabbed my duffel bag, and walked out of my room. I walked through the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had cooked their dinners every night for 3 years. I didn't leave a dramatic note. I didn't write a long, emotional letter explaining my feelings. People like Sarah don't read letters to understand. They read them to find ammunition. I simply placed my house key on the granite kitchen island. Next to it, I left the garage door opener. I stepped out into the cool morning air and unlocked my car. It was a reliable sedan I had bought in cash 5 years ago. Sarah hated it. She said it made the driveway look cheap next to their leased luxury SUVs, the leases I had been secretly helping David pay when he fell short. I started the engine and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. I drove to a 24-hour diner a few towns over. I ordered a black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. For the first time in years, I ate a meal without someone criticizing my chewing or complaining about the salt. At 7:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Sarah. "Where are you? Leo needs a ride to school. And you didn't make the coffee." I read the message, took a sip of my coffee, and set the phone face down. I didn't reply. Let her figure out how to drive her own son to school. The first domino had been pushed, and I was perfectly content to sit back and watch the rest fall. By 9 o'clock, I had checked into a comfortable extended-stay hotel on the other side of town. I unpacked my few belongings, hung up my clothes, and sat by the window overlooking a small park. My phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a text about coffee or chores. It was a frantic string of messages. "Mom, why is my card declining? I'm at the grocery store and it's completely embarrassing me. Call me right now. The bank says I'm not an authorized user." What did you do? Pick up the phone. I watched the screen flash with her incoming calls. I felt a brief flutter of the old guilt, the motherly instinct to fix things for my child. But then I touched the small bandage on my cheek. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear calm. I blocked her number. I opened my banking app again. I transferred the bulk of my savings into a new individual account at a completely different bank. I wasn't going to let them try to guilt their way into a teller's sympathy. Next, I called the cell phone provider. I was the primary account holder. "Hi, I need to suspend 3 lines on my family plan," I told the representative. "Yes, effective immediately. I'll keep my personal line active." Within 5 minutes, Sarah and David's cell phones were cut off from the network. Without Wi-Fi, which I had also stopped paying for, they were going to have a very hard time coordinating their panic. She couldn't spend money that no longer existed, and she couldn't call me to complain about it. The next morning, I drove into the manicured parking lot of the townhouse complex's leasing office. It was a beautiful building with a pristine pool and a private gym amenities I paid a premium for, but only Sarah ever used. She loved inviting her friends over to the clubhouse, acting as if she and David had achieved this lifestyle all on their own. I walked through the glass doors. The property manager, a polite young woman named Jessica, looked up from her computer and smiled. "Mrs. Larson, how can I help you today?" "Is there a maintenance issue with the unit?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit. "No maintenance issues, Jessica. I need to give my 30-day notice to vacate," I replied, taking a seat and placing my purse on my lap. Jessica furrowed her brow, pulling up my file on her monitor. "Oh, but the lease doesn't expire for another 4 months. And looking here, you're the primary guarantor on the account. You bring in the qualifying income." I understand, I nodded. "I am breaking my portion of the lease and paying the early termination penalty today. I have already moved my belongings out. I will no longer be financially responsible for that unit after the end of this month." She stopped typing and looked at me, a flash of realization crossing her face. Property managers see family drama all the time. She knew exactly what this meant. "I can process that for you, Mrs. Larson. But without your income on the file, the other occupants, Sarah and David, will need to requalify for the apartment within 5 business days. If they don't meet the income threshold, they will be issued a notice to vacate. That is entirely up to them to figure out," I said, sliding my debit card across the desk. The penalty fee was $3,200. Some people at my age might hesitate to part with that kind of money just to leave a lease early. But as I watched Jessica swipe the card and print the receipt, I didn't feel a shred of regret. I wasn't losing money. I was buying my freedom. I folded the paper receipt and slipped it into my purse. I had just pulled the roof out from under them. Not out of malice and not through any complicated revenge scheme. I simply stopped being their safety net. They wanted to act like they owned the world, treating me like a disposable servant in the process. Now they had to pay the actual cost of their lifestyle. The walls of Sarah's perfect curated life were crumbling, and I didn't even have to raise my voice to make it happen. At 3 o'clock, I parked my car a block away from Leo's high school. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry autumn leaves. I rolled down my window and watched the yellow buses line up. Soon, the double doors pushed open and a flood of teenagers poured out onto the sidewalks. It took me a few minutes, but I finally spotted Leo. He was walking alone, his head down a dark beanie pulled low over his ears. He looked exhausted, carrying a heavy backpack and the weight of the last 24 hours. I stepped out of the car and gave a small wave. He paused, blinking in surprise before jogging over to me. "Grandma," he breathed, dropping his backpack on the grass. He looked visibly relieved to see me. "Mom is going completely crazy. She's been screaming since 6 in the morning because her phone won't make calls, and the internet is completely dead." Dad tried to blame the router, but then his car insurance app wouldn't load. "Where are you staying? Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly safe, Leo. I have a nice place across town." I smiled, reaching into my coat pocket. I handed him a small paper bag. Inside was a prepaid cell phone and a charger. "This is for you. The number is already programmed with my contact. You can call me or text me anytime you want, but you cannot give this number to your mother or your father. This is just for us." He took the bag, holding it tightly against his chest. He looked down at the concrete, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you coming back to the house?" "No," I answered gently. "I can't live in a place where I am treated like a burden. You are a wonderful, smart boy, Leo. But your mother needs to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet, and I can't teach her that by staying." He kicked a small pebble with his sneaker. "She threw that glass really hard, Grandma. I'm sorry." I should have said something. I reached out and tilted his chin up so he had to look at me. "You never have to apologize for someone else's behavior, especially your parents. It wasn't your job to protect me." "Did you look at the camera?" A small, genuine smile finally broke through his tired expression. "Yeah. I figured out how to load the film this morning before school." "Good. Focus on your photography. Use the camera. Call me on that phone when you want to get lunch, and I will come pick you up." He hugged me tight. It wasn't the awkward, obligatory hug of a teenager. It was a real, solid embrace. As I watched him walk toward his bus stop, feeling the weight of the camera in his backpack, I felt a deep sense of peace. Sarah and David were going to face a storm of their own making, but I had secured the only person in that family who still had a heart. It took David exactly 3 days to find me. He couldn't call me, so he had driven to my sister's house, practically begging her for my location. She had called to ask my permission, and I told her she could give him the address of the hotel. I wanted to see this out. I was reading a book in the lobby when David walked through the sliding glass doors. He looked exhausted. His suit was wrinkled and he hadn't shaved. "Megan," he sighed, rushing over and dropping onto the sofa across from me. "Please, you have to undo this." "The leasing office gave us a notice today. We don't have the income to qualify for that townhouse on our own." I marked my page and closed the book. "Then I suggest you start looking for a smaller apartment, David. Sarah is a mess," he pleaded, leaning forward. "She didn't mean to throw the glass. She was just stressed. You know how she gets. You can't just turn off our phones and our cards. We're family. Family doesn't bleed you dry and treat you like dirt." I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I paid for your lifestyle for 3 years. I paid your rent. I paid your car insurance. You and Sarah mistook my generosity for an obligation. So what, you're just going to leave us with nothing?" He raised his voice, slightly looking around the lobby. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you've earned," I said, standing up. "Don't come back here." I turned and walked toward the elevators. They thought I would negotiate, but I was already done. 2 weeks later, the reality of their situation fully set in. I was shopping in the produce aisle of a local grocery store when I heard the sharp clicking of heels behind me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I turned. Sarah stood there clutching a plastic shopping basket. She looked pale and entirely out of her element. Her designer clothes looked a little less sharp, her hair a little less perfect. "Hello, Sarah," I said, turning my attention back to the apples. "We have to move into a 2-bedroom apartment in the city," she hissed, stepping closer. "David had to sell his car because we couldn't afford the insurance. My friends are asking questions." "You ruined my life." "I didn't ruin your life," I answered, placing 3 apples into a bag. "I simply stopped paying for it." "You're my mother," she snapped, tears of pure anger welling in her eyes. "You are supposed to help us. You have the money. You're just being vindictive over one stupid argument." "It wasn't one argument, Sarah." I looked directly into her eyes. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. The glass was just the one that finally made me bleed. "I am not your bank, and I am not your servant." I placed my bag of apples into my cart. She stood there waiting for me to break, waiting for the mother she could manipulate to come rushing back. I simply pushed my cart past her and walked toward the checkout. I was just a stranger buying apples. A month passed. The dust settled. I moved out of the hotel and signed a lease on a beautiful, bright condo near the lake. It had large windows, a quiet balcony, and exactly 1 bedroom. I didn't need extra space for ungrateful guests. Leo visited me on Saturdays. He would take the train into town, and we would spend hours walking along the water, him snapping photos with the vintage Canon I had given him. He told me that his parents were fighting constantly. Without my money, buffering their lives, they had to actually face each other, and they didn't like what they saw. "Mom complains about you every day," Leo said one afternoon as we sat on a park bench eating sandwiches. "She says you abandoned us. How do you feel about it, Leo?" I asked, watching the sailboats on the water. He adjusted the camera strap around his neck. "I think it's a lot quieter now. And I think you did the right thing, Grandma. You seem happy." "I am happy," I smiled. And it was true. My chest didn't feel tight anymore. I didn't wake up dreading the sounds of footsteps on the stairs. I had taken back my finances, my boundaries, and my dignity. I didn't need to argue with Sarah anymore. I didn't need to defend my choices. I just needed to live my life for myself. My grandson understood that, even if my daughter never would. It has been a year since the night of the shattered glass. I turned 69 last week. I woke up early, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on my balcony watching the sunrise over the lake. The air was crisp and peaceful. The mail arrived around noon. Among the catalogs and bills, there was a pale pink envelope with my name written in Sarah's familiar loopy handwriting. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on the kitchen counter while I went about my day. In the evening, I finally picked it up. Inside was a generic birthday card and a short note. "Mom, it's been a hard year. David and I are trying to figure things out. I'm sorry about how things ended at the house. We really need some help with Leo's tuition next semester. Please call me." I read the note twice. There was no real apology for the abuse, no acknowledgement of the disrespect. It was just a tactical retreat to gain access to my wallet again. The old me would have called her desperate to fix the bridge, willing to ignore the disrespect just to hear her voice. The new me walked over to the trash can and dropped the card inside. I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't owe her a fight. I had given her everything I had. And when she threw it back in my face, I walked away. Some people never learn to respect you until you are entirely out of their reach. I closed the trash can, turned off the kitchen light, and went to read my book. I was finally home. If there's one thing I've learned from walking out that door, it's that we often confuse endless patience with unconditional love. For years, I thought if I just gave a little more, helped a little more, they would eventually appreciate it. But I realized the hard way that when you constantly ignore your own boundaries, you aren't fixing the relationship, you're just teaching them that it's okay to treat you poorly. Walking away from family is heartbreaking, but sometimes closing the door is the only way to find your own peace. You don't have to be a safety net for people who treat you like a burden. Has there ever been a time in your life when you had to make the hard choice to walk away from someone to protect your own peace? I'd really love to hear your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me and helps bring more stories like this to life. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.